Hello, BookTube. Well, after quite a few technical stops and starts, we are now at the fourth and final part of my Columbus Day Q&A. Took all of Columbus Day to do it, but I think we're finally there. And part three, the camera cut out for the 10th time today. The camera cut out in the middle of a rant of mine about that was from a question by James Holder about who is the worst king of England. I was going on about the fact that I thought that Edward VIII, who was named but never actually crowned, was the worst king of England uh, because he disparaged and he disvalued the crown for purely personal reasons, for selfish reasons, no sense of duty. And I was in the middle of saying that in addition to that, in addition to being purely a creature of ego, there's another thing to hold against him is that I think there's a very strong case to be made that he would have taken his crown back again under the most horrifying conditions imaginable. I think there's a strong case to be made, a strong case to be read between the lines of the historical documents, that he would have been willing to be a puppet king in a Nazi-dominated England, and may even have been conniving towards that end before he was rusticated out, to the provinces. There was a bombing run on London. The route of the bomber is extremely suspicious. It looks to me like it was guided by inside information. There were conversations between then the Duke of Windsor and his wife with representatives of the Nazis that seemed to me to indicate, to make a case that he'd have been willing to be the puppet king of England, to be restored to his throne if the Nazis had successfully invaded. And the reason that's so horrible is not just because Quislings are contemptible just by their nature, but also because if you think about it for a second, what's the only way that could happen? It'd be the death of his brother and his brother's children. That's the only way that the secession could be cleared. It's just the whole of it is ugly. If you're asking who I think the worst monarch in English history is, he gets the prize from me. And then we'll move on. We don't have many questions left, and that's good because I don't really want to go through the existential heartache of another 20-minute video that takes 5 hours to upload. So we only got a couple questions left. The next one is from Peg at Book Reviews from Peg, who says, if this is not too personal, could you talk about the different places you have lived, traveled, and the time frame? I can't help but feel that helps form the kind of person and readers we are now. I totally agree. It does form who we are. The different places that I have traveled would be far too long for one video. The different places that I've lived, it's a small, discrete handful of places. Places where I have not been living out of a suitcase, where I set down roots and stayed for a certain amount of time, even if it was a long amount of time. That list of places is much shorter. There are a few places here in America. There's Hermosa Beach. There's Iowa, of course. There's Austin, Texas. There's here in Boston, and there are a few places overseas. There's the extreme north and west of Ireland, in the middle of nowhere. There's Kuala Lumpur, and there's of course Venice. And in each of those places, the pattern that I used was, this was all a very, very long time ago, but the pattern that I would use would be to find somebody I could lodge with, essentially find a landlady who would be willing to talk to me and make a deal and get to know me and that sort of thing, so that I could then indulge in the absolute prerequisite of no longer being a traveler, which is to go to a local square, sit at a table, have a little meal, and just watch the day unfold. If you can do that with no hint of the time and no looking at the clock and no places to be and no worries about closing of a window, then you live there. And I've done that many times, but that was all a very long time ago. My traveling days are over. And then this is actually the last question. So we got to the end. This won't be a long video. This is from Jacob Kyle. What are your views on Robert Burton and Robert Musil And do you know of any unknown 20th century Austrian masterpieces, preferably early 20th century or modernist, that deserve more recognition today? God, I love my subscribers. In answer to the second question, no, I don't know of any early 20th century or modernist neglected Austrian classics. If I do, I'm sure I don't know that they fit those qualifications. But for the first part of the question, well, Robert Burton is the author of a gigantic and impenetrable book called The Anatomy of Melancholy, which I love reading. I don't know what sense any 21st century reader could make out of it. Although it was reprinted, it got a nice reprint from the New York Review of Books, so there must be a market out there somewhere. It's an incredible encyclopedia, one-volume encyclopedia of all the learning that Burton had ever done, all the learning pretty much that had existed in his day. It purports to examine the moods and psychology, what wasn't known as psychology at the time, but the moods and humors of the human brain, but it rambles over so much territory that I find it incredibly fascinating, just from a historical and literary point of view. I also think it's very interesting. This really smart and well-read guy trying to grapple with these intangible mysteries of human nature, and obviously at many points in the book trying to grapple with them in a new way, in a way that didn't involve the Hippocratic, the standard old world balance of humors and evil spirits or whatever, that tried to grapple with them in what would be a forward-looking way of Wyrick, essentially. I think it's a fascinating book, but I couldn't recommend it because it's a fascinating book, but it's an abysmal reading experience. I don't know how a reader who wasn't already disposed to be interested in it would read even 10 pages of it. But it's great to know that you ask, because it must mean that you have it and maybe like it. And I'm always happy to hear there are people like that out there. And the same thing's true with Robert Musil, who wrote a gigantic book called The Man Without Qualities, that got a beautiful 2-volume slipcase new translation about, 25, 30 years ago, that I just loved. I wish I still had that box set. I don't. I would certainly have reread the book by now if I had it. It's one of those perfect things where I think it's a great novel. I think it's just fantastic the way it takes us. Its exercises in interiority, I think, are just great. I know of hardly any modern novels that equal it, and it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that I just, in the back of my mind, am always looking for at the Brattle. That box set with those slipcase hardcovers will turn up at the Brattle. I guarantee it will. It's a classic thing that turns up at the Brattle. It's just a question of, when I least suspect it, there it will be. And that's it. That is, I believe, I have covered everything. Let me just check here to make sure there are no new questions. No. Okay. So that's it. That is our Columbus Day Q&A, which took forever to do, but it was a lot of fun. So next time there's a horrifying U.S. mail holiday, we'll have to do this again. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap up finally for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.